Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a scholar of the law, tested him by asking, "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, once again, welcome to Daily Mass. Those of you who are starting to make this a habit. Just a reminder, I know especially today at noon, many of you are coming straight from work, right? So don't be embarrassed if you come in late or anything like that. It kind of makes me happy to see people coming in late, because it tells me that you're probably somebody who wouldn't be able to come to Mass if we hadn't made this time change, right? So don't be self-conscious about that. One of the things we typically do at Daily Mass is we do sing the Salve Regina during the offertory. So there are some white sheets in the back of the church, some laminated sheets with the words for that. Today we have this passage from the prophet Ezekiel. So I accidentally had things set to the wrong page, so I appreciate Jane being patient, right? But this is reading from the prophet Ezekiel, right? And it's a very profound reading. Ezekiel lived about 600 years before the birth of Jesus, and Ezekiel lived during a time called the Exile, which was when basically, God had established his kingdom in the Promised Land, and it had kind of had its glory days during the days of King David and King Solomon. But over the course of a few centuries, the people of Israel had largely abandoned the covenant with God. They had become very wicked and immoral peoples. And it got so bad that at one point they basically lost their version of the scriptures. It's talked about in the story of 1 Kings, that basically they discovered the book of the law in the temple. They had lost it for many years. Imagine the corruption that they had to endure. Imagine in our modern age, right, if the Bible was completely lost. That's how far astray the people had gone. Ezekiel even said that he had a vision. As he was in Babylon, he had a vision inside the temple that some of the priests, they had actually set up pagan statues in the sanctuary at the temple. So things were not good. And because of that, the people of Israel were carried off to a foreign land into exile. And the more that they rebelled against this foreign nation that took them over, the worse that it got, culminating with the temple actually being burned to the ground. So the people of Israel were humiliated, and they lost everything. And when they were carried off into exile into Babylon, those pagan peoples, they would make fun of them for their religion. And they would say, "Where is your God now?" And all these different things. So it seemed like all hope was lost. And in the midst of that, Ezekiel has this vision. And God shows him a valley of dry bones that are completely lifeless, decayed. And God asks Ezekiel, he says, "Do you think that these bones can be brought back to life?" And of course, Ezekiel doubts. And God says, "Yes, I will bring these bones back to life." And Ezekiel has this vision where these bones begin to take on flesh, and they form bodies of human beings, right? And they become alive, right? And it's a metaphor. God says that just as these bones appear completely lifeless, so does my people Israel. But I will bring Israel back to life. And this is a prophecy about what would happen in the days of the Messiah. And in fact, that is what happened. That for many centuries, the people of Israel became almost like a forgotten nation. But with the coming of Christ, all of a sudden God's people began to spread throughout the entire world. So much so that within 3 centuries, Christianity became the dominant religion of the world. The point of this vision that Ezekiel has is that even though God's people can become unfaithful and lose everything, God always has the ability to revive his church. And this is something that has happened all throughout church history. Some of the persecutions of the Roman Empire, the fiercest persecutions, the faith only spread that much more. In the beginning of the Middle Ages, some so-called the Dark Ages, right, when the Roman Empire fell, that was when the church, it seemed like everything was going to be lost. And all of a sudden there were all these different pagan nations that began to be converted to Christianity. The time of the Protestant Reformation, when there was all this division arising in Europe in Christianity, that was when all of a sudden the faith began to spread to places like Central and South America, and Africa, and Asia. Even in the 20th century, that all of us, we've lived through ourselves. As here in the United States and in Europe, everything becomes more and more secular. There are places in the world where Christianity is thriving. Places like Africa, or even certain places in Asia. I remember when I was in seminary, we had guys from Vietnam, and there were so many seminarians in that nation that the government actually put a cap on how many people could go to the seminary. So thriving is the faith there. God always has the ability to revive his church. And he always has the ability to revive the faith of all of us as individuals as well. Because all of us go through times in our life where our faith becomes stagnant. And those are the times where we need to beg God to rekindle the faith within us, to ignite our faith, and to increase our love for him.